Welcome to the Breaking Muscle Podcast, where we bring you the stories and insights of some of the top athletes in the world. I am Pete Hitzeman, your host for today's show and managing editor at BreakingMuscle.com. The life expectancy for the career of a top-level athlete in any sport isn't very long. In a sport as rough on the body as track and field, it can be just a few years. For an athlete who is outspoken against the establishment to flourish as a professional racer for over a decade is almost unheard of. But if you follow track, you've definitely heard of Nick Symmonds. The recently retired 800-meter specialist sat down with me to discuss how he went out on his own terms. We covered the dispute with USA Track and Field that led to him being left off the 2015 World Team, and the absurdity of professional athletes literally starving under rules built for amateur athletics. Nick has never been shy of sharing his opinions, and this interview is no different. He minces no words about the International Olympic Committee, his thoughts on doping in international sports, and the roots of East African dominance in the middle and long distances. We also dive into why the surge in popularity of running hasn't carried over to track and field, why professional athletes need to remember that they only get paid to entertain, and the field event he wishes he could have tried. If you're enjoying what we bring you each week, you can help us get the word out by heading over to iTunes and Stitcher and leaving us a rating and a review. If you have some ideas for future guests or how to make the show better, drop us a line at editorial@breakingmuscle.com. My guest today on the Breaking Muscle podcast is none other than two-time Olympian and six-time national champion at the 800-meter distance, and the silver medalist at the 2013 World Championships in the same race. Nick Symmonds is joining us. How are you today, Nick?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for stopping in. It's a funny thing to ask to someone who's my age, but how is retired life treating you?
Oh, it is a funny thing to ask. It's kind of strange. I've been competing competitively in the 800 and track and field for 20 years. And professionally for 12, but here I am with my spikes hung up on my wall, and I'm never going to use them again. It's a strange feeling. It's a day that I've been, secretly dreading and looking forward to since I started running 20 years ago.
It's weird to say you've been running 20 years, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I still remember vividly that first day of cross-country practice, 20 years ago when I was just 13. And I just remember hating the sport, absolutely hating the sport of distance running. And every year for 20 years saying, this is definitely the last year that I'm going to continue running. But, you just keep doing it, and you find this love-hate relationship with it, and it is a bit of an acquired taste. And I'm proud of myself for sticking through to the end. And I really feel that I found just how fast I could be, and I had a great time doing it. But I am ready to be retired, and it does feel good to not have to be a slave to the miles anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, how fast you could be got pretty fast. You went well under 4 in the mile, indoor and out, I believe.
I broke 4 in both indoors and out, and my 1,500-meter converts to about a 3:52 mile.
Nice. So you went out this year on your own terms, which is something that doesn't often happen in professional athletics. You went to your last meet kind of knowing it was your last meet, and you were going to put it all out there on a sort of a dodgy ankle and see what happens. Can you kind of walk us through that weekend?
Yeah, I in hindsight, I probably should have just called it a career after failing to make the Olympic team last year. I tore a ligament in my ankle and was unable to run at the Olympic trials. That would have been my third Olympic team. So I definitely feel it was appropriate to train for that. I got about a week away from making my third Olympic team before my body gave out. I wanted to kind of have a farewell tour of sorts in 17. I knew it wouldn't be the same kind of season that I was able to put together back in my mid-20s, but I wanted to say goodbye to the fans, and I didn't want to go out with an injury. I wanted to go out swinging. And so in that sense, I was very successful. In another sense, I kind of jogged around the track at the 2017 U.S. Outdoor Championships. I was 33, which was 5 years older than the next oldest competitor, and I really legitimately hobbled around the track, and I'm sure it was sad for some people to watch, but for me, it was a rewarding moment. It provided a sense of closure to the whole thing, and it gave me a platform to announce my last and final professional race, which will be the 2017 Honolulu Marathon. And in the world track and field, we look at road racing and marathon specifically as almost a totally different sport, but it's still very much a popular part, especially in terms of pop culture, very big part of our sport. And it's the only thing that I haven't done in running is to complete a marathon. And so I'm really excited for that race, which will be December 10th in Honolulu.
Yeah, I think however the race itself went, the the way you went out was very much appreciated by your fan base. I know a lot of my track and field junkie fan friends were following that weekend with a lot of interest. It was cool to see somebody choose to do it, even though it wasn't like exactly how you. I mean, you didn't go out with like a gold medal, but like you still went out like,
Swinging.
Put it all out there the last time you could. Yeah,
exactly. You put it all out there, and I think what's so unusual about that weekend is very few people retire because they don't have a single step left in their legs. Unfortunately, in the world of track and field, you typically retire because you can't financially do it anymore because there's no money left, there are no sponsorship dollars, or you retire because you have a never-ending string of injuries. Neither one of those are what caused me to retire. I just got old, and I can live with that. I can absolutely live with that. Again, very grateful to have had such a long career. I think the average track and field career professional is about 2 or 3 years. So I had a career of 12 years as a pro, and I'm one of the lucky ones. I got very, very fortunate to have great sponsors, a great team in place helping me out, and a certain amount of durability that allowed me to be healthy for so long. But at this point, at the age of 33, I can't turn left anymore. I can go and give you 26.2 miles later this year, probably pain-free, knock on wood, but I can't run around the track anymore. And I really left it all out there. I've got absolutely 0 laps left in these old legs, and it's time to go on and do some bigger, not necessarily better things, but some other things.
Sure. I don't think it can be stated enough how rare a career that long is at a shorter distance race, right? Like there are endurance runners who go well into their 30s, even late 30s, and stay competitive. Mo Farah is just now retiring, and he's pushing 40, I believe. But turning left and going fast is really hard on you, especially in spikes. Like it just blows you to pieces if you do it over and over and over again for years and years and years. And so to go 12 years at that level is hugely important. One thing you just mentioned that I really want to touch on is a lot of people stop racing because they run out of money. And to me, that's the greatest travesty in American sports, right? Because we pay our more popular sports athletes tremendous amounts of money to do almost nothing, relatively speaking, to some of our less recognized athletes. Our track and field athletes, our wrestlers. We had a female gold medalist this year at Rio who, basically starved to death at Rio, partially because Rio was a dumpster fire of an Olympic Games, and partially because we just don't take care of our athletes that well. You have been, over the years, a very outspoken advocate for the rights of athletes at the top level. Can you kind of talk about what spurred you to speak up in an environment where that's not encouraged?
I think, when I first came out of college, I was just so excited and honored to be a pro athlete, to be sponsored by a company like Nike at the time, to be representing my country in international competition. It was everything I dreamed of. I just was so excited that I was a pro athlete. Even though I wasn't making millions, in fact, I was barely making enough to pay my bills, I was a pro athlete, and that was enough for me. Then in my mid-20s, I got kind of bored with just the pro athlete lifestyle of eat, sleep, train, and I knew I needed more to be happy. And so I started studying business. In fact, I actually incorporated a couple businesses here in Eugene, Oregon, and not just studied them, but worked on being a successful businessman. And as I came to understand how business worked and understand the flow of dollars and sponsorships and exclusivity, I really learned just how many billions of dollars are involved with the sport of track and field. And people laugh at me when I say that. They say, no one's watching track and field, there's no money there. And I'm like, you are wrong. There are not just millions, there are billions and billions of dollars built on the backs of the hard work of these athletes. Unfortunately, none of that money ever makes it back to the athletes, or maybe less than 1% ultimately makes it back to the athletes. And that's a travesty. I really mean this. We are a semi-professional sport. Track and field is far, far from being a professional sport. We don't have a collective voice. We don't have, we don't have a lot of things that a professional league would entail or provide for us. In fact, we're governed by a piece of legislation from 1978 called the Ted Stevens Amateur Sports Act. All Olympic sports in America are governed by this act, and it's so inappropriate, so antiquated, because we're professional athletes governed by an amateur sports act, and that's what leads to the biggest parts of the problem, is that the governing bodies take all of the advertising dollars and let a couple dollars trickle down to the athletes, and so I was really outspoken once I realized that there was all this money in track and field and none of it was going to the athletes. That greedy bureaucrats, the IOC, USOC, and USATF were taking all the money. And I wanted that money for myself. I earned that money. I didn't want a penny from them. I just wanted the right to sell my advertising space that they had taken from me. And I spent years and years fighting for that advertising space to come back.
And there's been at least a conversation started by your protests of some really draconian rules, as you've noted. I want to ask, how does the USA basketball team govern by those same rules, or are they?
They are. Yeah, the U.S. basketball team, and this is one of the reasons why, you'll read stories about Carmelo Anthony calling all of his NBA friends and saying, guys, you got to play this year. You got to play for the Olympics because we need to win this thing. The NBA players don't want to play in the Olympic Games. They get paid $0 for it, and it's a huge risk of injury. So they're looking at their, cost-benefit analysis, and they're saying, why would I jeopardize a season in the NBA where I could make millions to go and play for absolute free? And the horrible part is that the IOC pressures these athletes into doing it, and they know they're making millions. So let's go back and look at the history of it a little bit. So up until the late 80s, early 90s, you had to be an amateur to compete at the Olympic Games.
Right.
But the IOC said, you know what, these professional athletes have such a huge following. If we allow the pros to compete at the Olympic Games, they'll bring their followings with them. So Michael Jordan and the Dream Team in '92 brought millions and millions of new eyes to the Olympic Games. But the problem is the IOC never compensated those athletes for bringing the new eyeballs. Eyeballs bring advertising dollars. Advertising dollars go into the pockets of the IOC. A certain amount of that ad revenue needs to be shared with the athletes that are bringing those new eyeballs, but none of it was. And that is where we stand today. Pro athletes bring with them followings, fan bases to the Olympic Games. The IOC makes about $4-5 billion, in a cycle on that, and then they compensate the athletes with zero of it. That's just wrong. I've seen a lot of crooks and thieves throughout the years. The NCAA is a great example, but no one tops the IOC when it comes to stealing money from the athletes.
Maybe FIFA?
FIFA's bad, but not nearly as bad as IOC.
Yeah, it's definitely a hive of scum and villainy for sure. It's like this is a John Oliver episode waiting to happen, isn't it? Like
it was actually an episode of Real Sports on HBO, a 90-minute special about just how I don't know if corrupt's the right word, but corrupt's probably the right word, but how absurd the IOC's model is. It's just brilliant what they've created. It is a for-profit entity that's made to look like a non-for-profit. Like, hey, just compete for love of country, for love of competition, for pride. But you don't see the IOC doing their jobs for free. You don't see USATF and USOC doing their jobs for free, but they expect all the athletes to do their jobs for free.
And it is a job. I mean, you have to train and sleep and eat and recover and pay for a massage therapist, and there's this whole string of things. I didn't really realize how much expense there is in being a world-class athlete. Everybody thinks about the work involved, and there is for sure a lot of work, but there's also a lot of expense involved. And I didn't really realize that until I was talking with Andy Galpin, who's worked with a whole bunch of pro-level athletes. And there is a team of specialists that at a certain level.
I would say the average cost to make an Olympic track and field athlete is somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000.
Wow.
And that's aside from living expenses. That's not like food and shelter. That's massage therapist, sports psychologist, coach, lifting coach, all the airfare, everything that goes into making an Olympian is roughly $50,000 to $100,000 a year.
And then you end up eating, ramen noodles and pre-cooked chicken just to stay alive.
Games. Yeah. No, it's a shame. Americans love to win the medal count at the games. They love to see Americans standing atop the podium, but that costs money, and someone's got to pay for that. And right now, it's corporate sponsors, but it's getting harder and harder to get those corporate sponsors.
Right. So you've been quoted as saying that you're a businessman first and a runner second, and I think that's fair. Do you think that the environment will change as long as athletes are athletes first and not looking after themselves in the business sense?
No, unfortunately, because and this is something I always tell the athletes, like, your job is to run fast or jump high or throw far. Your primary job and your responsibility is to be the best athlete you can be. there are a lot of other people that should be out there watching out for those athletes.
Mhm.
You know, coaches, agents, and especially the governing bodies. But that's not the way it is. Everybody's out in it for themselves, and because the athletes are so predominantly focused on the task at hand of being the best athlete they can be, they get shafted. And I was really, really fortunate to have some great people in my corner, and it's one of the reasons that I got paid better than a lot of athletes in my 12-year career, because people were watching out for me. But if I hadn't had Coach Sam in my corner, if I hadn't had my agent Chris Lane fighting the battles for me, it all would have been taken from me, like it's taken from so many pro athletes.
Right, and you would think the governing bodies, like you mentioned, you would think that they're in an ideal position, and you would think that their default stance would be to stand up for the athletes and make sure that they get what they need to continue.
Yeah, they're tasked with doing that, but it's not what happens in the end, because it's so much easier to just sell the athletes to a corporation like Nike and put a bunch of money in your pocket. That's easy. It's not hard to do that. It's hard to do what's right and stand up for the rights of athletes. Fortunately, USATF took the lazy way out and just shoved a bunch of cash in their pockets.
Well, and it was a lot of cash. Like, how do you turn down $20 million a year from Nike, right? So let's touch on Nike as the 800-pound gorilla that has sort of dominated American running for these many decades. There is the famous brand dispute of 2015 as a result of it, which you were left off of the 2015 World Championship team after you won the trials. There was some tit for tat there, and it didn't really get resolved to anyone's satisfaction. Can you kind of walk us through that whole scenario?
Yeah, I honestly don't have any problem with Nike. They're a powerful corporation. Anytime somebody gets to be very powerful, there's a certain sense of, are they getting too big? Nike's job is not to protect the athletes. It's not to protect the integrity of the sport, track and field. Nike's job is to sell shoes. And they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to sell as many shoes as possible and to watch out for their bottom line. So I never have a problem with Nike acting like a big business. My issue was always when USATF, who is supposed to be watching out for the rights of the athletes, gets in bed with Nike. And that's what USATF did. They pimped out the athletes to Nike. They put, it was rumored to be a $20 million a year contract with Nike. And they took all that money and put it in their own pockets. And I think by one independent economist, estimated that only 8% of that contract went back to the athletes. In a typical major league sport like NFL, MLB, NBA, 50% of the revenue is shared with the athletes. In track and field, 8% of the revenue is shared with the athletes. That's just wrong. And so that's what I was really standing up against and trying to point out that, hey, USATF, if you want me to wear Nike, I'm happy to. But tell me where I'm required to wear it. Tell me where I'm not required to wear it so I can represent my sponsor, the one that's paying my bills, and then share that revenue with me. Then we actually have a deal. As it stood, they wrote a very ambiguous contract and used bullying tactics to try to force athletes to appease their sponsor and violate the contracts of the individual sponsorships that each athlete had. Now, I was sponsored by Brooks Running, and I had a contractual obligation to wear Brooks gear at all times except Team USA functions. Mm-hmm. So I simply said to USATF, hey, tell me what you define an official USATF function as, or Team USA function, and they refused to do so. So I couldn't sign the contract, and that was the crux of the argument there that ultimately ended up with me not being on the 2015 team to Beijing.
Yeah, I think the most one of the noteworthy quotes to come out of that dispute was when USATF was contacted, I think by ESPN. They replied and said, oh, no, it's much closer to 50% because we're counting insurance deductibles and television production costs.
They counted meat production costs. They counted paying referees or judges, meat officials, as part of athlete compensation. Their bookkeeping is so absurd.
Yeah.
It's just you know what it is? It is illegal. The way that they do business is illegal, and that's why my company Run Gun is suing them. They are violating antitrust rules left and right, and we're suing them for that for violation of antitrust laws.
Is that lawsuit is still ongoing? The last I saw there was an appeal, but I don't know from.
Yeah, we've appealed the dismissal, and it's in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals right now, and it's an incredibly tough case because you are going up against this legislation. Congress Congress did give immunity to these governing bodies in 1978, but what they were giving immunity for in 78 when athletes had to be amateurs to compete is so irrelevant to today's market. The way the rules are written were for a 1978 competition where Olympians had to be amateurs, and that's just simply not the case today. And I think that the judges in the appellate court are going to understand that and are going to overturn their original decision, and we're going to be victorious. And these rules are going to be changed, and athletes are going to start making the money that they deserve, that they've worked hard for.
And I hope that does happen. There needs to be a lot more sort of transparency in where all this money is flowing, and the right people need to get it. The sport doesn't exist without the athletes, and at some point, I want to get to it a little bit later in the interview, but the sport is sort of contracting in a lot of areas, and it's not going to change until we make it a lucrative place for top-level athletes to go. They're going to go to other sports that pay.
So many athletes that have great potential in track and field, and they go and they play football because there's money there. They go and play any other sport because there's just so little money in track and field.
Right. One thing I've always wondered, when there's a preferred brand or whatever, or an official team brand, does that brand even work for all of the athletes? Like,
not always.
Yeah.
And that's why fortunately the IOC wasn't completely stupid in this instance, and they allow technical gear to be chosen by the athlete. So, for example, when I run an 800 meters, my technical gear is my spikes, essentially. So I always got to choose which spikes I wanted to wear. But my uniform is non-technical, meaning my shorts and my singlet were chosen by my federation. So, in that sense, I think if you're a skier, you get to choose your skis. If you're a skater, you get to choose your skates. If you're a runner, you get to choose your shoes. But ultimately, the uniform, the non-technical gear, is chosen by the federation. Okay. And sometimes, I know a lot of people that they don't care for Nike gear. They, runners that don't find that Nike gear doesn't fit them particularly well. They still have to wear Nike gear in competition at the games.
Right. I think it was at Rio in the weightlifting competition. A lot of athletes had to have tape over the sides of their shoes, or over their singlets, because they have their own rules to deal with there. But it's just kind of bizarre. Like, who cares? I don't.
IOC cares because they want to control every single square inch of advertising.
Yeah, because the more control they have, the more money they can make. So
exactly.
I get it from there. So let's move on to some more cheerful things.
Yeah. All right. I haven't thought about that in a while.
Yeah.
I tried to block all that out from my memory.
Yeah, I can't blame you. But so the sport of running is growing. Professional running is hard to measure, but
running by the masses is growing.
Right. Yeah, and it's been growing in leaps and bounds, more leaps than bounds, I suppose, since Arthur Lydiard introduced jogging in the 60s and 70s, right? So part of the blowback from, I would say, the old guard has been that the races themselves are getting less competitive. We just had the Air Force Marathon here where I live this past weekend, and I think the winner of the men's marathon ran a 2:46, which is not slow by any measure, but is not like a nationally competitive time by any stretch either. A lot more races exist now than used to be. There's all kinds of, the rock and roll series, huge marathon series that never used to be a thing. Is this a net gain or loss for running as a sport to have more people but running slower?
It's tough for me to answer because there's kind of two different sports here we're talking about. We can talk about running, and we can also talk about track and field. Mm-hmm. And though running as a sport is growing exponentially, track and field viewership is shrinking. And so there's this disconnect between people who identify as runners or enjoy running and track and field. The runners are not necessarily watching pro track and field. So on the one hand, I think anytime you're growing running, it's a great thing for a civilization or a community, because I believe that running offers a lot in terms of health advantages. I think it's very good. It keeps you out of trouble. It certainly kept me out of trouble. In my mid-20s. I think running is good for communities, and all you have to do is go watch a marathon or your local 5K to see people out enjoying the fresh air and doing something good for themselves and interacting with their neighbors. I think that's an awesome thing. So in that sense, it's fantastic. Even if people are out, and I always say this, even if you're going out and all you can do is manage a 12-minute mile or a 13-minute mile, That's awesome. Get out, put one foot in front of the other, and be proud that you're doing something to better yourself. You don't have to go out and run a 14-minute 5K to be a successful runner. I know really successful runners that couldn't break 20 minutes in the 5K, but they have so much fun going out and running their 21-minute, 22-minute 5Ks, and that's awesome. That's winning to me. But in track and field, there's this huge constriction because we're failing to convert those joggers, those runners, to being fans of track and field. That's a bad thing, and it's another opportunity for me to throw USATF under the bus. They've done a really bad job of building the sport of track and field, of getting young runners to be passionate about the sport of pro athletics and pro track and field.
Well, part of that is they put the races behind a paywall. If you have a sport that nobody's really interested in,
their marketing team is abysmal.
Right.
They've got one person running social media. We'll go down to LA to run the Oxy Invite, and this is a stadium that only holds a couple thousand people, and it'll be totally empty. And you talk to your friends down in LA who love track and field, and they go, I didn't even know there was a meet going on. When you're in a city or a metro area of about 10 million people and you can't fill a 2,000 person stadium with your top tier talent in track and field, like that's a bad sign for the sport.
Well, so here's an interesting nexus is the 5K is a familiar distance for everybody. There hasn't been an Olympic gold medal in the 5K for the United States since 1964 when Bob Scholl won. The only reason I even know that is because Bob Scholl is the predecessor of the running team that I'm on. So he trained the runner that trains me, which is kind of neat. But how can the most popular race in America have not produced a 5K champion in all of that time, given that they're different? I mean, a road 5K is very different. A cross-country 5K is very different from a track 5K. But still, there should be at least some recognition there.
Well, the East Africans have just been so massively dominant in distance running, and there's a lot of debate over why they're so dominant in everything from 5K up, or really the mile up, whether it's just being born at altitude or different training, different genetic makeup, drugs, probably a combination of all of those. Mm-hmm. But East Africans have dominated distance running for several decades now.
Is there one thing you think that they have that we don't?
Yeah. They have one national sport. It's running.
Yeah.
If America had one national sport and that sport was track and field, and Tom Brady wasn't playing, quarterback, he was throwing the javelin, we would be so freaking good at track and field. There's not a single country. You could have the entire country versus the United States and we would destroy them. But all of our talent goes to sports where you can actually make some money. Mm-hmm. So I think that the fact that Kenya is, Kenya plus Ethiopia and a few other countries is a sizable populace that grows up at altitude, that is genetically quite lean, or has a great strength to weight ratio, and when they grow up, they don't grow up idolizing Tom Brady. They grow up idolizing David Rudisha, and wanting to be a great runner, because for them running fast is a way out of poverty. So everyone there runs, and naturally the cream rises to the top, and you take that talent and you develop it, and then you get the world's greatest distance runners.
Although I would pay good money to see Tom Brady throw a javelin. That would be.
You know what? There's this guy, Andreas Thorkildsen, and he's Norwegian, and he won, I can't even count how many titles he won, a dozen world championship titles, and he's the nicest guy. I think he's 6'4", 6'5", 220, really, really athletic, very mobile. He's your quintessential quarterback, NFL quarterback, and he's got an arm like a cannon. And I said, why didn't you ever play NFL? He goes, we didn't have football where I was raised. I'm like, if this guy was raised in Texas, he would be, a 7-time Super Bowl champion. He's just your perfect quarterback. And so I think my digression here is that if Tom Brady had been raised to throw the javelin, Tom Brady would be a multi-time world champion, gold medalist, Olympic gold medalist in the javelin. He's got a great arm. He's built for an event like that. He's very mobile, and he's proven that he can be coached. Javelin's not a particularly difficult event. It's very repetitive. It's just about subtly adjusting your technique to maximize the torque that your arm can deliver to a javelin.
And then a limited number of times you can do that before your shoulder falls off.
Your shoulder and elbow especially.
Yeah.
It's actually a lot. I have a lot of respect for javelin throwers. It is a really physically brutal event to your elbow and your shoulder.
Yeah, if you watch the super slow-mo, I think super slow-mo cameras are the best thing that ever happened to track and field because you can see so much more of what goes on in every event. But watching the field events, like, it blows your mind the mutations that bodies actually go through to make all that happen. It's pretty
long jump's a great example of that.
Yeah.
You know, some of those pictures of people like basically sitting in a chair with their legs extended, you know, 10 feet above the ground, it just blows the mind.
With their kneecaps up their nose, like it's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Olympics are coming back to Los Angeles in
2028.
Yeah, for the third time. And Los Angeles is a great city to host it. There's lots of, natural features there to host the specific events, and it's a big enough city to kind of absorb the cost. Rio, on the other hand, was not a city that was ready to host that event. Everything I've heard from those Olympics, from everyone who went, from athletes to coaches, and now, the pictures are coming out now of how everything collapsed, since the games left. Mm-hmm. Should the Olympics stop traveling? Should we just have a summer city and a winter city and call it good?
Absolutely. Without question. Without question. The Olympics bankrupts communities and destroys communities, destroys people's homes. It's inefficient. It used to be that it built up communities. It built up these countries, and countries would compete for the chance to host because they knew the economic stimulus that would come from it. That's not the case anymore. And that's why the IOC basically begs countries to bid for the games because no one wants to host it anymore. I think this is the Winter Games next year the next Winter Games was placed by default because every other country pulled out. And the IOC's list of demands to be a host city or even just to bid is ridiculous. So I think for so many reasons we should pick a summer location, and this might not be popular, but it should be London. And we should pick a winter location. And as someone who's never competed in the Winter Games, I can't really speculate where that should be. But I think London makes a lot of sense for the Summer Games, and I think it would be successful. I think it would be a time for the world to come together and not have to worry about, can they get it done in time, and can we get there? Will they even have enough infrastructure to host a decent games? All the questions we heard about Rio, and then you're not going to have to worry about these stadiums sitting empty and just crumbling down. I saw the Bird's Nest last year. 8 years later, it's crumbling. I saw the pictures from Rio. All that infrastructure is crumbling now. We just wasted billions of dollars to have a cool party. And I just don't think that's what IOC is, or the Olympic Games was founded for. It's not supposed to be this thing that hurts communities. And Pierre de Coubertin created it to be this celebration of sport. This celebration of at the time amateur athletics, and it was in the mission statement. It was said it was not supposed to be for commercial gain, and we've gone so far away from what the Olympics was originally supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean the TV contracts alone are worth more money than most people will ever contemplate in their entire life. So
absolutely,
it's just crazy. One more thing, and then we'll stop beating up on the Olympics. Everybody and their mother is getting banned for everything. It's gotten, especially in the weightlifting community, it's gotten really aggressive over the past several years with USADA and the International Anti-Doping Agency basically banning the entire Russian team from everything and then banning large portions of the Chinese team. Do you think that there are similar bans or similar level of investigation coming for the U.S. team, or are we that much cleaner than some of the rest of the world?
I don't think that we are clean by any means. There's a lot of dirty U.S. athletes out there. I would say that we are considerably cleaner than a lot of other federations. I'll just juxtapose Russia versus U.S. At least we have a domestic anti-doping agency, USADA. Mm-hmm. We don't have state-run doping that I know about. Whereas, if you watched Icarus, Russia had state-sanctioned doping. We don't, their entire government was helping them cheat. So we're cleaner than Russia. Like, that's not setting the bar real high, but we are cleaner than Russia. Yeah. I don't think that the U.S. Federation is going to have its moment like Russia or some of these other countries have had, because we do invest millions and millions of dollars in USADA to try to keep sport clean. Now, does USADA do a great job at catching cheats? Probably not. But there's also there's less incentive for Americans to dope than there is for some other countries.
Yeah, that's the double-edged sword of well-compensated athletes, right? The more you raise the financial incentive to perform, the more incentive there is to push those envelopes.
Yeah, and I really mean this. If you watch NFL or MLB, I really believe that at least 3/4 of those athletes are on drugs or have been on drugs at some point. And that's a conservative estimate. It might be higher, like 90%, because the economic incentive for cheating is so great. You go on to make, even if you're just making league minimum in the NFL, I think it's up to what, 425 or 450, and you've got young kids growing up, in impoverished communities saying, "Sign me up. What do I have to pump my veins full to get that money?"
Right.
And I don't I mean, it's messed up, and I really think it's wrong, but I don't blame them. I can't. I was born in a very comfortable middle class family, raised in Boise, Idaho. Always had food on my plate. If I was born in an inner city and my only way out was dealing drugs or doing drugs to become a professional athlete, sign me up, and I would do drugs to lift myself and my family out of poverty. And that's why there have been Kenyans or East Africans that have said the exact same thing.
Right.
They said, if I cheat, maybe I shave a couple decades off my life. Maybe I risk getting banned. But I also, if I don't get caught, could win millions of dollars and not just lift myself out of poverty, lift my entire village out of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, the incentive for doping at that point is too great to pass up, I would say.
Yeah, I had the good fortune of receiving my weightlifting certification from a national level coach who has coached internationally for a whole bunch of years, and he said his conversations with the Russians and Eastern European coaches were very funny because they think we're stupid for not cheating.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, their perspective is, why would you go to the games and not try to win?
Yeah, and that's why we're at such a massive disadvantage sometimes when we go to compete internationally. And as I started to hear more and more stories like that, a study recently came out that at the 2011 World Championships for track and field, which was in Daegu, South Korea, they had an anonymous survey. Basically, it said, "Have you ever done drugs? Yes or no?" And it's totally anonymous. I mean, there's no reason anyone would lie on this. And 43% of respondents said yes.
Oh my gosh.
43%.
That's a lot.
And that's probably low. It's probably low because there were still some people who lied on the sheet and said no.
Sure.
So, maybe over 50% of competitors are on drugs at a world championships. And as soon as I started to realize that, it became really, really difficult for me to train and compete. Because I knew I was never going to do drugs, and I didn't want to go into a loaded card game. Why would you want to go into a game where the cards are stacked against you? And 15, when I sat out the World Championships, kind of sucked. It would have been nice to go to my 12th to 11th World Championships, but at the same time, I was like, well, now I don't have to waste a summer competing against a bunch of dirty athletes, And I never said that. I never said that in 15 because there were so many young men and women who had just made their first world team, and I didn't want to ruin it for them. Mm-hmm. But that was honestly a factor in my decision, was knowing how dirty that World Championships was going to be and not wanting to go into that game where it was loaded against me.
Speaking of loaded fields, there's a very difficult conversation going on in the women's 800-meter field right now with Caster Semenya. Mm-hmm. What do we do about this? Like,
it's so easy. Everyone makes it so much more complicated than it needs to be. Genetic testing. You have a category where if you're an XX chromosomal human, you compete against other XX chromosomal humans, and everyone else competes against each other. So all anomalies, all mutations, they all compete against XY humans, because XYs are characteristically male. And then you have XX, which are characteristically female. Boom, problem solved. So if Caster Semenya is an XX female who just happens to have elevated testosterone, I'm sorry, girls, but she's a genetic anomaly, but she is female. She's going to compete against you. However, if Caster, and I suspect that she is an XY male without external male organs, she is not, she identifies as a woman, so I'm going to use the pronoun she, is not allowed to compete against XX females. As the most powerful factor in sport that we have ever as a species uncovered. It's not EPO. It's not all these designer drugs. It's the Y chromosome. Mm-hmm. The Y chromosome is the strongest performance enhancer in the world. And so if Caster Semenya has a Y chromosome, she can't be allowed to compete against women that are XX.
If she is XX and just by some, natural weird occurrence, she has these crazy high levels of testosterone, that's still fair game?
Most women competing at the Olympic Games, and if they're doing it clean, have abnormally high levels of testosterone. That's a fact. I mean, if you look at their biological passport, they have elevated testosterone levels.
It would be interesting to study and anonymously publish that sort of data, right? To find out, like, how high are these?
It's just so invasive. No one's going to volunteer for it.
Right, and then
to be fair, no girl wants to run around saying, "I have abnormally high levels of testosterone."
That doesn't go on your Tinder profile.
No, I don't think so.
So this December, you're doing your final professional race at the Honolulu Marathon. It's your first and last marathon, or first and last professional marathon?
It's my first marathon, period. Okay. I will be running it for my sponsor, Brooks. And I think it will probably be my last marathon. Everyone likes to joke, these marathon addicts. They say, "Oh, wait till you try the taste of the marathon. You're going to be addicted. You're going to do them all." And I'm like, no, I don't think so. But I am really excited to do one, and I'm super excited that it's Honolulu. I could have chosen between a lot of different fall marathons, but Honolulu made a lot of sense. They just run an awesome show there. Jim Barhall, the meet director, is one of the best meet directors I've ever worked with. And the idea of kicking my feet up on the beach after 26 miles of running sounds real nice.
That does not suck. Well, so if you hit your goal, which is go sub 3, that makes you a Boston qualifier. Have you thought about Boston?
That's the only reason I hold back a little bit of I'll never run another marathon. If I run under 305, I think is the qualifier for my age group. It's hard to pass up an opportunity to run in Boston, but I may get through 26.2 miles and say that is enough. I never need to do this again. I think I just have to cross that bridge when I get there.
Sure. You're also chasing the high points in all 50 states and the 7 highest peaks in the world, which would put you in some rare, if exclusive, company.
Yeah, it would actually be exclusive in some sense that no human has ever broken 4 and stood on top of Mount Everest. There's a lot of debate about which one's harder to do. No one can answer that question because no one's ever done both. I would like to be that person.
Well, if memory serves, those 2 events, independent of each other, were accomplished pretty close together, weren't they?
Dude, you have such a good memory. You're like a historian. So in the 50s, 2 men were trying to accomplish both feats, right? Okay. Scientists said a human cannot run under 4. Mm-hmm. And scientists said a human cannot stand on top of Mount Everest. And here come 2 badass heroes, Roger Bannister on the track and Edmund Hillary in the mountains. And about 18 months apart from each other, they were able to do both feats. Roger Bannister broke 4. Sir Edmund Hillary stood on top of Everest with Tenzing Norgay. And, the floodgates were open. And now several thousand people have done either, but no one's ever done both.
Wow. That would be that'd be a good thing to put on your tombstone.
Yeah.
Climbed Everest, broke 4 in the mile. Let's change gears. Your pre-race mindset ritual, how are you before a race? I know a lot of people who race in a lot of different disciplines. I started out in the motorcycle industry and got to learn a lot of pre-race stuff from them. There are people who are basket cases. There are people who are super intense. There are people who are so chill they almost fall asleep. Where do you kind of fall on your pre-race rituals?
Right in the middle. I was always really good at kind of compartmentalizing stuff in my mind, so I wouldn't allow myself to think about the race, or I tried to think about the race as little as possible until I showed up to the track, to the venue. And then I spent the next couple hours kind of doing some visualization exercises, just imagining how the race would unfold and imagining where I would be in my splits and what I needed to do to win the race. I think people around me who knew me well could tell if I was nervous. I get kind of chatty and jittery. But I was never one of these athletes that was just crippled with anxiety. And thank God, because I remember in high school I started out that way as an athlete that just, was really, really nervous and anxious. And as I came to understand how powerful my mind was, or the human mind is, and channeling that nervous energy into running on the track. I think I got really good at harnessing that energy. But if you'd seen me before the 2008 Olympic trials, I was on a path to beating myself before I even stepped on the track because I was so nervous and so anxious. And I think that is still to this day the finest example for me as an athlete of rising to the occasion, because I knew that if I didn't finish top 3 at the Olympic trials, I'd have to wait 4 more years to become an Olympian. That do or die moment is difficult for many athletes to approach.
Was there a technique or a change that facilitated your ability to kind of meet that tension and that pressure?
I wasn't able to figure it out myself, so I called a mentor of mine, Kelly Sullivan, who was coaching at Oregon State. He's the guy that actually brought me out to Oregon in 2002. And he said, Nick, one thing I know about pro athletes is that the cream always rises to the top. He goes, you'll always have your outsiders, your outliers that sneak in for a spot, but for some reason, the better athletes always find a way onto the teams. And he said, you've shown time and time again, whether it was at the Idaho State meet or the D3 national meet or the 2007 U.S. championships, you always find a way to get to the front. And he goes, I have absolutely zero doubt that you'll find a way to make this team. And as soon as he said that, a guy who's seen it as many times as he has and reminded me of what I was able to accomplish in the decade leading up to that, it just kind of put all my fears at rest, and I was able to really sleep and train a lot harder and stay a lot more calm in the days leading up to the Olympic trials that year.
One of the things that always set you apart watching you run through your career was that you weren't afraid to sort of show emotion. Track and field athletes are a lot like cyclists in that they tend to be very game face. They get to the start line, it's game face. They get to the finish line, it's more game face, but with heavier breathing. You were never afraid to show your emotion before, during, and after a race. Was that a conscious choice on your part, or could you just not help yourself? I
was passionate. I mean, honestly, I'm a passionate person, and when you win a race after spending a year making sacrifices and grinding out through the wind and rain and doing stuff that you don't really want to do, and then you win that race, the thing you've been training for, celebrate, throw your hands up, stick your tongue out, high five people. I mean, still, I don't miss most of pro athletics. I don't miss the bullshit dealing with the governing bodies, the corruption, the drugs. I don't miss the sacrifice. I don't even miss the training. I miss that moment of stepping across the line and throwing my arms out and saying to the world, yeah, I just did that. And there's no way for me to replicate that feeling. Business helps, and that's why I'm an entrepreneur, because when I make a big sale, I get to throw my arms out in my office and say, I just did that. Now, the world doesn't get to see it on the big stage like they did when I was at track field, but for me, I still have that moment of, that dopamine hit to the brain that said, yeah, you're a badass. That it feeds the ego. And not that I'm a massively egotistical person, but, I'm addicted to that feeling of proving myself, of challenging myself and meeting my goals.
Well, I think it helps the sport. Like, if you have people who are, displaying more than just their business-like professionalism, it helps regular people like me identify with them. That's one of the reasons I like watching women's track and field probably more than the men. Is because they allow that to happen. They're very genuine, even in the middle of the race. Did you watch the women's steeplechase finals?
Emma.
Yeah. Yeah,
she's a great example. There's a girl that works so hard. Yeah. And she is very emotive, and she's very fun to watch. And it was a bizarre and fantastic race. If anybody who's listening hasn't watched it, go YouTube that sucker, because it is worth watching 3 or 4 times because of all the dimensions that happen in that race. But I think a lot of athletes would do well to remember that they are entertainers. There's maybe too much of that in some sports, like basketball and football. There's a lot of showboating, and boxing. Yeah, sure. But really, truly, and I didn't realize it until probably my mid to late 20s. Athletes are only paid to entertain, and if you're not entertaining, just get off the track, because that's what you're there for. You're there as a billboard, and if you don't put eyes on the billboard's worthless.
One of the things that I think is missed in all of the storytelling about Steve Prefontaine is that it's not just that he was fast and fearless on the track. He was a compelling person. he was somebody that everybody could look at and go, I want to be like him because of the personality.
The charisma that he
Yeah.
had is unmatched on
Yeah.
any athlete that's ever stepped on the track, in my opinion. Just
Yeah.
the sweat. I mean, Bolt has great charisma. Bolt's fast, but if Bolt wasn't such a showman, he would have made a fraction of what he made. He stepped on the track and you knew he was going to do the lightning bolt pose, and you knew he was going to like do something funny when he started, and you know, he'd had the swagger about him. He was really a great showman. Conor McGregor, whether you like him or hate him, Conor McGregor, and I don't like MMA, I don't like boxing, I don't like fighting, but I pretty much, without fail, will watch Conor McGregor's fights because I love to watch him build his brand. I love to watch him dance around and, you know, make a scene. I just like him as a showman.
What was your favorite race that you were in, and what's been your favorite race to watch?
My favorite race I was in was the 2008 Olympic trials because, you know, crossing that finish line and making your first Olympic team is still the highlight of my career. Even more than running an Olympic final or winning a world silver, making your first Olympic team, that is the sweetest moment, you know, for me at least. My favorite race to watch, I mean, I love watching the 8 for obvious reasons, but you know, my favorite thing to watch in track and field, pole vault.
Really?
I love watching the pole vault. I secretly wish I could have been a pole vaulter. I love the body type. I love the way the event is constructed. I love, you know, just this grip it and rip it attitude that those vaulters have. You know, if you've ever watched a vaulter crash and then watch their brain full on change and have the yips and completely fail to be able to vault afterwards, you understand that there's this piece of their brain that is fearless, and they have to be that way in order to do what they do. And when I watch Renault, the world, did he win this year? Did he win in 16?
I can't remember.
Lavigne, he's the French vaulter. He's this. I mean, he's a true freak in the sense that most vaulters are 6'1", 6'2", 6'3". I think he's about 5'9".
Oh, wow.
But this guy, he's so fast, and he just has no fear, truly fearless on the pole. And he is he's my favorite athlete to watch in track and field.
Yeah, it's definitely pole vaulting is one of those sports that I've watched and I can in no way identify with it because there's none of those skill sets that I have. But It is still fascinating to watch. The dynamics of getting yourself into the right position to use the leverage and the physics involved. It's incredible stuff.
Well, and it's where the physics meets the human body, because you know the physics behind bending that pole are all great and good, but unless you can generate enough speed and enough inertia to bend it properly, you ain't going to get much physics out of it.
Right. Right.
It's a really cool event.
I had a lot of fun watching Matt Centrowitz at Rio.
Yeah. He's an entertainer also. I've known Matt since he was a kid, and you know, if you follow him on social media, you know he's very entertaining. He's got a little swagger to him, and you don't see that often in distance running.
Yeah. Well, and to talk about swagger, the kind of swagger it took to get in the front of a loaded field at Rio and just run your race and dare them to outkick him. Like, he dared the entire field to outkick him at the end.
He is tactically the best middle distance runner that I've seen in 20 years of running.
Yeah, it was amazing.
If you want to be a great miler, just watch Matt Centrowitz's races. He's very tactically astute.
Yeah. So you were the D3 national champion all 4 years. Went to a very small school, Willamette, right?
Willamette, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that was an advantage for you to be in that small school environment versus being at an Oregon or Boston College or something like that?
Yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, if had I gone to a bigger school, I would have had more competition and more resources. On the other hand, I come from a state like Idaho where I liked being a big fish in a small pond. I liked calling the shots. Kind of liked the attention that I got, and so I went to Willamette, and from day one, I was their best athlete. The day I stepped on campus, even though I was only a freshman, I was by far their best athlete, and so I guess you got to know yourself. Had I gone to a big state school, I would have given in to temptation. I probably would have been drinking and doing a lot of other stuff that I didn't need to be doing. At a little school like Willamette, where the average class size was I think 10, I had professors holding my hand through classes. I had coaches calling me to make sure I was going to go to practice. I literally had my mentor and coach Sam LaPre come to the fraternity and drag me by the hand to practice. I, at the age of 18, was very prone to giving in to temptations, and I'm fairly certain had I gone to a big state school, I wouldn't have graduated college and probably wouldn't have had the running career that I had.
Yeah, it's definite pluses and minuses. It's got to match the person and the environment. I mean, iron sharpens iron, right? You want champions to train with champions to push each other.
But I also recognize that great runners, men, typically peak in their mid to late 20s. So, like, if you understand that, then it really doesn't matter where you're at when you're 18 to 22. Go somewhere that makes you happy, where you enjoy training, where you're going to have some resources. Focus on having a good time. Have a social life. Study hard, but understand that your best years are going to happen 4 to 8 years after you leave campus. And I always knew that. My colleagues, my fellow collegians, never seemed to appreciate that fact. They always wanted to be world champions at the age of 20, and I was like, well, unless you're Allison Felix or Jeremy Warner, good luck.
Well, and the crucial thing, once you understand that physiologically you're not going to peak until well after your collegiate career, and that you somehow have to manage to pay your bills after you get out of college and still run full-time, is you have to stay healthy. And a lot of runners, I mean, starting in middle school, I've coached some middle school kids that their coaches I'm the off-season guy, right? I'm the private tutor. So their coaches during the season are just pushing them through miles and miles and miles, and then they're not healthy, or they get hurt, or they learn to hate the sport or something like that. Did you see that in your collegiate career of runners who were just being broken by volume?
Yeah, or intensity. I knew runners that just could not slow down on their easy days, and they had to hammer everything. And maybe they weren't running great volume, but they were just never taking the easy day, or they'd push too hard in the gym. And I think less is more oftentimes in training. It's better to be 90% fit and 100% healthy than the other way around.
What was your weekly mileage like, sort of at your peak?
At my peak, I was running 60 to 70 a week, which is pretty high for an 800-meter runner. About average, or maybe on the low side for a miler.
That's not compared to what a lot of people recommend, though. That could end up not being a whole lot of miles. How many were you training? Like 6 days a week, twice a day, or kind of?
I trained 7 days a week. I did 2 lifts. I was really honest in the gym, so you have to factor that in. I was also swimming twice a week, so you have to supplement that energy in. I mean, when I was really, really training, it was an all-day endeavor. I mean, it was a full-time job for sure.
And now that you are semi-retired, not quite retired from the track, are you still, the wake up and train kind of guy, or has your mileage slacked off a little, or no?
It has, but I've been trying to find this mileage that is like, I can eat what I want. It gives me energy rather than taking energy away. I really believe that a little bit of exercise every day is the best thing you can do for every part of your life. It helps your mind. It helps your body. For me, it's the glue that holds my whole day together. So I get out of bed and I go to the gym and I either run or I lift. And I think that for me, lifting a couple days a week and running 20 to 30 miles a week is that sweet spot. And that's what I do pretty regularly. As I gear up for this marathon, I'm going to bump that up to about 40 or 50 miles a week. But long term, an easy 20 or 30 minute run every morning, maybe some weightlifting here and there is just perfect.
Is the ankle still a little dodgy or no?
Only if I try to turn left on it. I mean, I can run in a straight line all day. If you asked me to run one lap of the track right now, there's a good chance it would really injure it. I suppose I could have switched to the road mile, but it's so funny. After 20 years of competitive running, I just really don't feel the need to compete with people anymore. And I needed it. I mean, I absolutely needed a way to channel that competitive energy in my teens and 20s. And right now, I just have absolutely zero interest in competing against people. I want to compete against myself in a marathon. I want to compete against nature and mountains in the hills, and that's good enough for me today. I really don't need to race people anymore.
A lot of professional athletes, like you're saying, they don't go out on their terms, and so they still have that drive to compete. They never really scratch that itch all the way. going out. So it's sort of good to have those demons put to rest as you
It really is, and I know a lot of people that retired early and still have that itch to compete. And for me, I have the itch to compete in business. Like I every morning I wake up, I'm just so excited to get into the office. It's exactly how I felt 12 years ago when I'd go to practice. And so I know I found what I'm passionate about, what I need to be doing for the next decade. I'm just really grateful that I had that nice transition between my pro running career and now my career as the CEO of Run Gum.
So what's Run Gum? This is we've kind of danced around it. What is the business that's consuming your hours and days now?
So Run Gum is chemically very similar to a sugar-free energy drink. I loved energy drinks. I loved the way they made me feel. The focus and energy that they gave me, they really hit the nail on the head with that energy blend. The problem was they were asking me to drink these heavy, sugary, carbonated liquids to get my energy. And whether you're a runner or a cyclist or a climber or even anyone just, living in their busy days, you don't always want to drink some nasty liquid to get your energy. So I took the actives out of the energy drinks, caffeine, taurine, and B vitamins, and I infused them into chewing gum so that you can chew a piece or two of Run Gum and get that same energy, that same sense of euphoria and focus without having to drink some 150 plus calories drink. It's cleaner, it's more affordable, it's faster. You absorb it up to 5 times faster because you're absorbing these stimulants through the lining of your gums rather than the lining of your stomach. It is just a better wheel. We didn't reinvent the wheel; we just made a better wheel.
Sure. And it seems like you're having a lot of fun, having a lot of fun running that company as well.
We are. I'm a co-founder and now the CEO. We started this in 2014, and it's been fun. We tested the concept for a year in track and field, and then we expanded to all athletes, and now we're expanding to all people. 90% of Americans use caffeine every single day in some way or another, whether it's coffee, 5-hour energy drinks, you name it. We really believe that when people try Run Gum, they're going to see that it's so much more efficient, so much more effective, that they're going to start using Run Gum for their daily caffeine needs. And truly, the growth metrics show that once someone tries Run Gum, they're likely to implement it into their daily caffeine strategy.
Lord knows that the writing doesn't happen without my daily obscene dose of coffee.
It is a performance-enhancing drug, and anyone that tells you caffeine isn't a performance-enhancing drug has never figured out how to use it correctly.
Everything's a performance-enhancing drug, right? So, I mean, different foods, if you hit your diet right on the money, you're going to be performance-enhanced. Do you think we're going too far with regulating the daylights out of literally everything an athlete can take?
Oh, who's doing the regulating, though?
Good question, yeah.
The question is, what is legal performance enhancement? What should be legal performance enhancement and what shouldn't?
Mm-hmm.
There was the science is so clear about caffeine as a performance enhancer that USADA and WADA really had a very serious talk about banning it. The problem is it's become such a large part of our culture. Whether you drink tea or coffee or Coca-Cola, you're going to be hard-pressed to find somebody who doesn't test positive for caffeine. So they let that one slip, and we at Run Gum take advantage of that. We say, hey, yes, caffeine is a massive performance enhancer. This is your better way to get it if you want to enhance your performance. And athletes around the world are realizing that. Testosterone or EPO, on the other hand, those shave decades off your life, and they're not easy to get. And when you do get them, they're very, very dangerous. And so if an athlete pumps their veins full of EPO, there's a good chance that they might keel over and die in a decade or two. So I don't think that those should be legal in competition.
Well, and then 10 years after they die, they'll revoke their gold medals anyway. So that'll be the end of that. What do you think about the 10 years after the fact? Rewriting the record books stuff. Is that? I mean, should there be like a statute of limitations on this?
I'll say this: if we had a way of guaranteeing that every single world record from today on would be clean, then absolutely rewrite the record books. Let's start from the clean slate. But it's absurd to say let's clean the slate so that new drug cheats can set records. Right. As we discussed earlier, it's not a clean sport. So erasing one drug cheat's record so that another drug cheat can have it is it's absurd.
The sport of cycling cracks me up, especially because the very first Tour de France they were doing cocaine during the race.
Yeah.
So to think that there was this this halcyon era of cycling is just an ignorance of history at that point. So what is next for you? You're climbing mountains, you're visiting high points in states, you're running a company, you're getting ready for a marathon. Aside from like sleeping once in a while, what else are you doing?
Yeah, it keeps me pretty busy. I'm going to focus on this marathon through the end of the year. Run gum, it's always my primary focus and my passion. I'd like to really start strategically picking off some of these 7 summits once I retire from running at the end of the year, and then I don't know after that. I suppose I'll start a family one of these days. I'd like to get my pilot's license, but for now, it's pretty much entirely climbing mountains and growing run gum.
That doesn't seem like a bad time. Is there a Nick Symmonds running program or training camp coming down the line?
No, I'd be a horrible, horrible coach. I do believe that the running community is kind of this community of very generous people, and that we should share our knowledge. So I post a lot of my training to my YouTube vlogs. So if people go to YouTube and search Nick Symmonds, there's dozens and dozens of videos of me training. They can see my lifting. They can see some of my workouts. They can even see some of my mountaineering climbing vids. So that's a resource. You can go to rungum.com and download my 2012 training log. I chronicled every single workout run and workout that I did leading up to the 2012 Olympic Games. It's kind of a neat resource, and you can get that absolutely for free at rungum.com. And you can buy run gum at rungum.com. You can also get it at Amazon and about 1,000 different retailers throughout the United States.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'll have to check out that training log. That'll be some interesting reading for sure. Where else should people find you online?
I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Nick Symmonds. Run Gum is on all platforms at Run Gum, and also nicksymmonds.com, where I post some pictures from my climbing. I try to stay busy. I like social media. I like interacting with my fans. Run Gum is a brand that not only aims to fuel, but also wants to inspire people to make the most of their busy lives. So if you follow Run Gum on social, we really want to encourage people to get outdoors and be active and see how hard they can push themselves, whether that's in sport or at the office, but just make the most of their busy lives.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been a very fun and informative interview, I think, and I can't wait to get this out to our listeners. We will chat again soon. I'm sure you'll have much more to talk about by about this time next year. You'll have all kinds of new stuff. So, again, thanks for your time, and we'll see you.
My pleasure. Thanks.